his behavior had been encouraged, he'd been goaded and cajoled and then shielded and protected very much by the TV tabloid PR complex, and it was he was a creation of that world in which ever more outrageous acts, including flamboyant demonstrations of his unrestrained sexuality, were absolutely encouraged.
Let's turn to Russell Brand, as you mentioned him. It's obviously the investigation in the Times and the Sunday Times and Channel 4 dispatches last week about multiple allegations of sexual assault and worse, all of which, of course, we should say he denies. You wrote in the Telegraph on Monday about Russell Brand. One of the many points you were making was that Russell Brand is not of the comedy circuit. People say this is a problem in comedy, and you say Russell Brand was not really in comedy. Explain what you meant by that.
Well, it was, to be fair, it was almost a response, perhaps it was a response more to sort of second-order effects of the story being discussed on Twitter. And I saw a couple of people I quite admire and respect, journalists and so on, saying, my goodness, the comedy circuit sounds like a right sewer. And I just wanted to say, I'm not saying that there might not be some wrong-uns on the comedy circuit as well, but Russell Brand was not among us, and he was not a product of that culture. The comedy circuit, I don't want to get accused of mansplaining to women that they have nothing to worry about. Apparently, there is a little list which circulates on WhatsApp groups, and women are alerted to the fact that there are certain people you shouldn't get left alone in the dressing room with or whatever. That may or may not be true. I haven't really been on the circuit as such for at least 10 years, because once you start to tour, it's a different kind of dynamic. But I just felt that his behavior had been encouraged, he'd been goaded and cajoled and then shielded and protected very much by the TV tabloid PR complex, and it was he was a creation of that world in which ever more outrageous acts, including flamboyant demonstrations of his unrestrained sexuality, were absolutely encouraged. And that sort of thing just doesn't happen in the comedy clubs. I don't remember any act that ever projected quite such unhinged Casanovian tendencies. Most men on stage in the world of comedy are there to complain about and illuminate and project their sexual inadequacy, if anything. It's just not funny to come on and flounce around like some great black bird of paradise, fluffing up your head feathers and your ruff and trying to attract women back into the dressing room. It was never that culture. I never encountered him at all on the comedy circuit. As I say, the one gig I ever did was a one-off where Simon Anstell was hosting, and Russell was at the back apparently because he was a friend of Simon's. I don't say that to try and denigrate Simon Anstell by association. Goodness knows whether he was or wasn't aware of what he may or may not have been going on. But that's my thing. He was not a member of that culture, and that was not where that kind of behaviour emerged from.
So we had Ria Lina was on the show for the first hour earlier on.
Sorry,
Ria Lina. And
yeah.
and she suggested that one might say that comedy is sort of no worse or no better inherently than any other industry, but simply when you're in an industry where a lot of it happens at night and people are sort of generally drunk by definition, and there's a lot of hanging around and drinking in green rooms and stuff, any industry that was in those conditions would probably sort of come across similar problems.
I mean, I think that's true, but Russell Brand particularly, I mean, you don't want to try and compartmentalize his behavior along with general bad behavior of men in industries, whether white collar, blue collar, entertainment. There is an extent to which, yes, drink flows. Most of our work does take place in licensed establishments, but clearly Brand's persona was forged under considerably more intense drug intake than just a couple of pints of lager. I have personal theories, and I don't know how much they are. They could be borne out by anyone who knows what they're talking about. But that he created a sort of persona and got away with things while he was, by his own confession, a heroin addict and using, no doubt, other stronger and more enlivening drugs as well. And because he got away with that kind of behavior when he was using those drugs, when he stopped using them and went clean, he found he was still able to get away with that kind of behavior, and it had its own momentum. And he created a kind of confidence, which is why people take drugs in the first place, that stayed there after he'd stopped taking them. That sort of thing doesn't really happen in most workplaces. You cannot hold down most jobs, outside of the Metropolitan Police with a drug intake on that kind of level. And I don't think that is, entirely a fair comparison either with the comedy circuit or anything else. I've known a few good comedians who had a coke habit for a while and then managed to kick it, and it interfered with their ability to function. But I don't think it even made them a danger in the dressing room. I mean, I am fully aware that it might be something I was blind to because I was in the privileged position of not being in their crosshairs. But it didn't feel like that. I don't think. And my wife, who's worked in PR in and dated another comedian before me, and we've been together for over 20 years now. And she has said to me that she never felt safer than when in the dressing rooms in live comedy clubs. But she worked in PR for Capital Radio, and she said there were certain people who worked there that you didn't want to be left alone with. And she's been in green rooms at TV shows and recordings in studios, and there were certain people there that you didn't want to get. It's a very different atmosphere. It's weird. I think something about broadcast media, obviously yourself excluded, Hugo, elevates people's ego, and they start to believe that they really are entitled to, droit de seigneur.
I mean, there's different kinds of celebrity, I guess, and there's how adjacent they are to sort of rock star Hollywood celebrity. I suppose matters a lot, and I suppose these are quite hard things to sustain when you're, as Miles Jopp once wonderfully said of Jeremy Hardy, mainly moaning in arts clubs. But look. When you have someone like Russell Brand who's building a career with such enormous success in his early days, because he was so outrageous, because he was so envelope pushing in kind of what was deemed acceptable and socially acceptable and so on, and then that translates into such sort of attention from the mainstream media, such adulation, and indeed such sort of such wealth. As a comedian who's working at the same sort of time, does that create a pressure to do the same? Were there points where you found yourself thinking, you know what, I should be more misogynistic on stage? There's clearly a market for it.
I think people overestimate the extent to which we can make those kind of conscious decisions. I've never been able to be anything other than I am. I have had agents and so on say, you could be a bit more this, you could do a bit more that. And I think, I'm sorry, but it's, I have quite a narrow range of myself that I can expose for laughs. There might be one or two shapeshifters who would be capable of reimagining themselves, reinventing themselves along those lines, but I don't think many of us can. The thing about comedy is, I'm not sort of pleading that it's entirely authentic exactly, but there is a certain way that most of us find that works on stage, that the audience buy, and I just don't think any of them would ever bought that from me. Funny enough, when I did start, this was 96 and before I'd ever heard of Russell Brand, I did try and have a bit of a rock and roll persona on stage. Just for the first few gigs, I wore black leather jacket and black jeans, I remember, and kind of my idea of myself was quite unlike what it is now.